Welcome to Anglican Unscripted, episode 41. This is the world's only video podcast where people get to sit down and talk about all things Anglican. News, events, people, places, things. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today's May 25th, 2012.
George, let's move on to today in history. And upon my deathbed, I want to be able to write wise words like these. And maybe some of you will catch on about who we're talking. Before the unavoidable journey there, no one becomes wiser in thought than him who, by need, ponders before going hence what good and evil within his soul, after his day of death, will be judged. Now, a lot of English people go, I know that name. It's Venerable Bede, yes. We're going to talk about Venerable Bede. Today is the anniversary of his death. He died in the 700s a long time ago. And we're going to talk about him here because we want to celebrate him. He was kind of the first Christian journalist, Christian historian, and he's noted for writing a 5-volume piece on the history of the Church of England, or he calls it the ecclesiastical history of English. And it's kind of neat when we get to go back and celebrate a fellow journalist. He's known for many different things, and he also got in trouble, George.
Well, he was not, well, when he got in trouble, are you referring to the fact when one group under the tutelage of an African church, their archbishop called him an agent of Satan?
No.
Or are you speaking of the controversy over the dating of creation? Was it 4,000 or 5,000 years before the birth of Christ?
That's the one.
Now, which controversy, Kevin? I just want to make sure we're clear. Because, journalists do get in trouble sometimes.
They do, and Bede is only known for one problem, was whether he dated. He decided that after adding all the things in the Old Testament that Earth was created 4,000 years before Christ, the theological understanding back then was, well, it's obviously 5,000 years. If that's the only thing he did wrong, and he didn't get in a lot of trouble for it, but people are like, this guy knows what he's doing. He's written extensive pieces, and Leo XIII, who was the Pope at the time, says we're going to make him the doctor of the Church.
Yeah, I think it was 1903. The Venerable Bede became the first native-born Englishman to be made a doctor of the Church, which is a title held by Thomas Aquinas, for instance, of a truly great scholar and teacher of the Christian faith.
Yep. And George and I celebrate him. I mean, it's so neat to have people that were able to write down the history at the time, and so much we know of early English culture and some of the first, second, and third centuries of the church were through Venerable Bede's work. And it's work that journalists do today and have done throughout the centuries that keep you informed. And he wrote a 5-volume piece without the help of the internet, without a word processor, without all the tools we use today to make the job easier.
But Kevin, it's a little depressing for me to realize that people 1,300 years later can still remember his mistakes. Yes. I mean, what are they going to remember about us? Nothing but our mistakes. Oh.
George, on to story one, we're going to talk about presiding Bishop Jeffrey Shorey and Bonnie Anderson, kind of the tale of two ladies here. As everybody knows, since 2006, presiding Bishop Catherine Jefferts Shorey was elected to be the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. At the same time, Bonnie Anderson was elected to the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church. And in the most clear understanding of ecclesiastical authority of General Convention, these two share a shared role of looking over the church. Am I right so far, George?
Correct.
Okay.
There are two houses of General Convention, and each has its own presiding officer.
Right. And the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Catherine Jefferts Schori, has done a fine job of really consolidating her power and making sure the House of Bishops fall in line with her. But Bonnie Anderson has come to disagreements with how Catherine Jefferts Schori is running the boat for the whole church.
Yeah, for those on the outside, they may view the Episcopal Church's leadership as a monochromatic left-wing group, that they're in lockstep on every issue. Well, on social issues and maybe justice issues, that may be true. But on the question of ecclesiology, how does the church work? There are very different visions. President Anderson, Bonnie Anderson, is an 8-term deputy from the Diocese of Michigan, has a vision of the Episcopal Church that is closer to what is enshrined in its Constitution, where the lay people play a leading role in determination of policy, whereas the presiding bishop has a semi-papal view, which is that she, by virtue of being presiding bishop, dictates how things are done. And that vision has come into sharp contrast now that we're running short of money and not everybody can have all the funds and authority that they want.
Well, money is an amazing issue in this. Presiding Bishop Jefferts Schori has all the money. Her office is fully staffed. She can hire the lawyers. She has a staff and communications people and 815.
The staff at 815 work for her.
Right.
That's her staff.
So 815 is hers. Bonnie Anderson is an unpaid volunteer working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, doesn't have a staff of paid people, doesn't have a communications officer, can't hire lawyers or really do anything other than submit travel vouchers. And there's a lot of the difficulty of how power gets structured in just that simple ability.
There have been times in the past, I think it was 94 or 97, when General Convention discussed whether or not to make the President of the House of Deputies a paid post. But they rejected it, saying we do not want to further institutionalize the church. Well, in the 20 years since that time, the church has become far more institutionalized, but because of the weakness in the structure of the President of the House of Deputies, all that institutional authority has been sucked into the orbit of the presiding bishop.
Yeah.
So now the presiding bishop, is not answerable to anyone.
So in the tale of two ladies, Catherine Jefferts Schori, the presiding bishop, has won. Bonnie Anderson, she put in her press release or her statement of resignation that she's leaving for her family. Boy, that's code words, and if you're a senator or congressman, watch for the financial struggle to follow. But I think she's leaving for more than that. I think she's really succumbed to the fact that Catherine Jefferts Schori has won this round, and even in this next coming General Convention, there's not going to be a whole lot of power put in the laity because Bonnie Anderson's now a lame duck.
Yep, and I should say that I think she's a very nice person, but I disagree with her very much so on theological issues. And in press conferences and over the years, I've had more than my share of fun of baiting her. For instance, she loves to say about how the Holy Spirit is moving through the General Convention,
right,
and that people know the will of God because Convention is speaking. And I will ask her questions such as, well, what was God saying to you? And when was, in other words, sort of implying that she's hearing voices. I personally am not enamored of the sort of guy who gets up and says, the Holy Spirit told me to do this today, and the Holy Spirit said yesterday to do that. Mrs. Anderson will do that from time to time to justify the actions of General Convention. Now that's a theological difference between she and I, but still she's someone who really has been quite good at her job. It's just all the authority has been sucked out of that job.
Well, people forget liberals fight too. I mean, there's always a power for struggle, or a struggle for power, and that exists anywhere you go, whether it's in conservative camps, orthodox camps, liberal camps. It's kind of the fallen human condition that we look for. We look for power, and I can't point to any side and say you're blameless in this. And it's going to be obviously a story we're going to follow, and there'll obviously be more news about this after General Convention.
If I, could make a prediction or whatever, I think that this is a tragedy for the Episcopal Church. Not because I think Bonnie Anderson was going to turn things around or she had a better idea of where to go. Rather, institutionally, it is taking away the last effective check to the authority of the presiding bishop. And I think that's a tragedy for the Episcopal Church.
It has been, because throughout Christian history, we've understood that the first order of the church is what, George?
Was it lunch? Or?
No, it was not lunch or dinner.
It's lay people.
The laity is the first order of the church. And I think the founders and the early fathers of the church understood that there has to be a shared role in the governance, because the Holy Spirit does not just speak to people with collars on. Okay, George, let's move on to story 2. Ooh, looking at the title here, let's change it from a story to a feature. We're going to do this every week until the next Archbishop of Canterbury is chosen. It's going to be called the Canterbury Sweepstakes. And what's going to happen here is George and I are going to go through the profiles of the leading candidates to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. I know it's exciting, and you're probably right up on the side of your seat. Oh, boy. Well, what's our source document for this, George?
It's the British betting shop, Paddy Powers.
Okay.
They've put together an odd sheet and will take wagers on who the next Archbishop of Canterbury will be.
And this is a great opportunity for George and I to look at who's at the top of the odds and let you know who these people are, because they're going to be the head of the church soon. And I know I take medication so I don't get the shakes too. Let's start off with the top of the list, and that's going to be Bishop Coxworth. Oh, this is in no apparent order. We're just going through the list as we had them printed off. Bishop Coxworth, he's the youngest bishop of the Church of England. He's been a bishop for 4 years. And George, this is our chance to go through some definition. He's an open evangelical. What's an open evangelical, George?
Well, an open evangelical stands in relationship to a traditional evangelical the way an affirming Catholic stands to a traditional Anglo-Catholic. And an affirming Catholic is someone like Frank Griswold compared to Jack Eicher.
Right.
They both are from the Anglo-Catholic tradition, but
one has been enlightened. I got it. All right.
Now, okay.
Well, the funny thing about Bishop Coxworth is he has a 2 degrees of separation from America.
Yes. Yes, Christopher Coxworth, his father-in-law is David Pitches, former bishop of Chile, Peru, and Bolivia.
Right.
And David Pitches is one of the leaders of the evangelical movement in the Anglican Communion, and was one of the bishops who consecrated Chuck Murphy, the AMIA.
Oh, we have an EMEA story for the week. Thank you. About time. We were running short of those. On to Bishop Graham James. He's been a bishop since 1993, and we're going to do another time to let people know what words mean. He is a liberal Catholic. Now, without getting sued, George, what does that mean?
A liberal Catholic is not quite as liberal as an affirming Catholic, meaning he is someone from the Catholic tradition of the Church, but he has progressive views on issues like homosexuality, women clergy, and things like that, but not as progressive as an affirming Catholic. This man was a chaplain to Robert Runcie,
Sure.
and at a young age became an assistant bishop down in Cornwall, Bishop of St. Germans, and then was moved up to Norwich, one of the senior sees. And he has a good reputation in the church. He's in his mid-60s, so he's in the older generation of in the running.
Right. And he's also an insider. You know, we're going to go through this list, and there's some people that are insiders in the know in the church, and everybody nods their head and gives a quick wink when they hear these names. Let's go on to another insider, Bishop Sentamu or Sentemu. So many different pronunciations I've heard. Tomato, tomato. He's the Bishop of York. Of all the candidates right now, he's probably the most polarizing. He was trained as a lawyer. He went to Oxford. He went to Cambridge. He suffered under Idi Amin, and last I heard, he jumps out of planes.
Yes, Archbishop John Sentamu is a joy for the camera and for the TV stations.
Sure.
He is always up for the TV, and some people accuse him of being a publicity hound. He'll jump out of airplanes with members of the British Parachute Regiment. He'll appear on a news show and take off his clergy collar and chop it up with scissors and say, "I won't wear it again till Robert Mugabe's out of office." He is loved by a great many people in the church who see him as a breath of fresh air, as someone who has chosen to adopt an English nationality, English way of life, English manners and morals. Other people detest him.
Well, he's detested because he's also adopt traditional marriage as a platform. He believes in marriage between a man and a woman and doesn't go for the new sexual politics. And in Britain, that's like touching the third rail. Britain, for most intents and purposes, yes.
And it's funny because the same people who are vilifying him now, 4 or 5 years ago, just loved him because he was leading the charge against the Metropolitan Police in London, claiming that they were institutionally racist. So the liberals just loved the fact that a black bishop was saying the police were racist. Now they detest the fact that a black bishop is saying you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage.
Go figure. Okay, on to Bishop Stephen Croft. He's the Bishop of Sheffield. He's also a insider, and he's done a lot of work with Fresh Expressions, which is a move with the Methodists and Anglicans.
Yes, he is also fairly young. He is 54 years old and has only been a bishop for about 3 years. He had been a theological college principal, as had Bishop Coxworth. They're sort of parallel courses. He also is an open evangelical, and he headed up the Archbishop of Canterbury's Fresh Expressions program, which was a way to introduce the Christian life in a non-church setting. And it's been very popular, very successful, and he is a candidate who is Paddy Powers gives him 9-to-1 odds.
That's not bad. All right, who had even odds?
But again, he's very young, so the committee has to decide which generation are we looking at, the older guys in their 60s, the younger guys in their 50s.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you take one of these older guys, you're getting somebody for 5 to 7 years. You take one of the newer guys, you can go almost 2 decades. You got to be careful what happens here. Now, the next person we're going to report on, we actually reported 2 weeks ago, was not going to be on in the running because he was going to be on the Crown Commission. All of a sudden, we learned that Bishop Charters, the Bishop of London, is no longer on the commission for some reasons unrevealed to us. He's the Bishop of London. He's kind of a rival to John Sentamu. I heard he was put up as a blocking candidate to John Sentamu, and we heard early on that he was appointed to the Crown Committee, and then as recently as 3 or 4 days ago, he's off the committee and in the running for Archbishop.
Yes, Richard Charters, like Graham James, was a chaplain to Robert Runcie, and he was appointed an assistant bishop, Bishop of Stepney, I think it was, in London in '93, and in '95 was made Bishop of London. Richard Charters is the consummate establishment bishop. The insider is Graham James. The establishment bishop is Richard Charters. He was one of the executors of Princess Diana's will.
Sure.
He is intimately involved with the royal family, with British institutions. He is very conservative on certain issues. He will not ordain women himself, but will have his suffragans do it. He's also in his mid-60s.
Yeah,
he too would be a short-term archbishop.
He would be short-term, but of all the candidates I see here, he's the pure Brit. If you took DNA from his blood cells, you would find that it's always been, throughout time in Britain, and it's one of those interesting things. What are his odds?
12-to-1. I just checked, so you might want to put your money down.
Yeah,
Richard Charters.
And
I think though one tip that I think may make this a 12-to-1 a good bet.
Yeah.
He's the only candidate with a beard.
He does have a beard. He has the follicles growing out of his chin, and from what I've seen in pictures of the last several archbishops kind of need that, or they need to have the eyebrows growing out. So
when we have an archbishop who stands next to, say, the Pope or some of these Russian Orthodox bishops, you want somebody to look the part. And Richard Charters, he's got the look.
Well, with our current archbishop, I would say looks aren't everything.
No. Rowan Williams, he is fantastic from a photographer's point of view. There's so many angles coming out of him. His eyebrows, his hair, his whiskers. I mean,
Right now I'm showing
a joy to photograph.
I'm showing on camera the most famous one where his eyebrows are all up and steamed. He's the perfect one for the camera. We need the perfect one for the church. George, let's move into story 3. This one actually comes from the mailbag as response to a story we did last week. Last week we talked about Oregon putting forward a motion to this upcoming General Convention in June, the Episcopal Church's convention, saying that we no longer have to be baptized before we take communion. Obviously an interesting supposition and something they want to use as part of a push for evangelism in their diocese. Now, our email bag became quite full because people responded to this because this is the first time this has been suggested in the church. A very famous father of our church, John Wesley, who actually left the Anglican Church and started the Methodist, also proposed this when he came to America.
Yes, and it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. Wesley, and this developed over time, but the theological principle that undergirded Wesley's view was the question of holiness and perfection. That we are moving in a path towards perfection, and that the Holy Spirit imparts upon us grace, and we don't need the mechanical actions of a minister to join us into the body of Christ. It's the Holy Spirit that does that, and that's all on that sort of path towards perfection. I'm giving a very quick answer to that.
Well, it is, but if you follow that line, you get all the way to Christian Science.
You're absolutely right. I'm not saying that Methodists are Christian Science, but this idea of perfection can happen in this life is what lies behind the prosperity gospel, and what lies behind Christian Science, that God is going to reward you and make you rich because you're holy, that God is going to keep you from ever getting sick because you're holy, because you're perfect. And this concept in Eastern Oregon and out west is sort of a mix of sort of half-heard Wesleyan things about perfectionism, that you really don't need it, the baptism, to be part of the Christ fellowship. And it's also, the roots of how we dealt with Mormons, where you don't really need it. And it's all sort of being mixed together in something that is very theologically sketchy.
It is, because oftentimes you want to understand how you do something, you go back to the original source document. When Jesus instituted the Eucharist, the first Eucharist, he was surrounded by believers who I assume were baptized. They were his disciples. And when he said, "We gather here," he was speaking to other believing people that were amongst him. And it's interesting that we want to take that outside of a church structure and understanding of something celebrated by believers and something we want to celebrate with all mankind, so to speak.
And we often have to say that it's not just sketchy people in Eastern Oregon. There are people on the extreme Protestant wing of the Episcopal Church who basically, say that you just need to be a believer and don't define what a believer is. One of the things I always found remarkable was that at the Lambeth conferences, we would have ecumenical guests, and these ecumenical guests would be welcomed into every aspect of the conference. And in 2008, I decided, we had a press conference with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I decided he was being evasive. And his, he was saying more with his eyebrows than he was with his words. And we were talking about Gene Robinson at a press conference, and how he was saying that, well, Gene Robinson really didn't share the mainstream of theology of the church, and we couldn't really have him be part of this community, or words to that effect. Right. And I said to him, you've got members of the Salvation Army here who are participating in every aspect of this meeting, but they're not baptized because the Salvation Army doesn't believe in baptism. Are you saying homosexuality is more important of an issue than baptism? Now, that's when did you stop beating your wife question, which you didn't answer. But but the point is, this baptism question is one that does separate us from other churches, and it does separate us in that we are a sacramental church. If you don't think it's important, go become a Quaker. Join the Salvation Army. Don't try to change the Episcopal Church into something it isn't.
Okay, Anglican Unscripted reporter Peter Old is live. Well, of course he's live. He's over there in England, where everything live happens. Live from Canterbury. And we got breaking news here. Apparently Richard Trumbull, who's the dean and principal of Wickliffe University, has, he stepped down. And there's lots of news behind this. And Peter has the story. What's going on, Peter?
Yeah, Richard Turnbull, who was the principal of Wickliffe Hall, which is a very old evangelical seminary for the Anglican Church and part of the University of Oxford. He's gone on extended leave and has been replaced as acting principal by Simon Vibert, his vice principal. That happened late last week and kind of burst onto the blogosphere, onto the interweb midweek.
Now, he was brought on in 2005, and he was going to kind of change things at Wickliffe. He's going to make it more evangelical, more conservative, and he had a plan, but a lot of that hasn't really come to fruition.
Richard Turnbull took over from Alistair McGrath, who was the previous principal, who's an absolute legend. Alistair McGrath was the principal when I was at Wickliffe Hall doing my seminary stuff, and Richard Turnbull took over right at the end. And my impressions of Richard Turnbull, of the few months that I knew him, was he was a great guy. Richard Turnbull came in essentially on a platform of making Wickliffe Hall a bit more conservative evangelical. Up to that point, it had been the sort of open, charismatic evangelical. Still had plenty of conservative people going there. Had a good mix of men and women, and so it was a pretty middle of the road evangelical college. Richard Turnbull went on the platform basically of making it a bit more conservative, a much bigger emphasis on biblical preaching and stuff like that. A bit of controversy in his first few years, with some major staff members being moved on. So Andrew Goddard and Liz Goddard, who were teaching ethics and doing like a quasi chaplain's job, they were moved on. Dr. Elaine Storkey, who was a visiting lecturer who's very big over here, she was moved on as well. And David Wenham, who's a very a great Dr. David Wenham, a great New Testament tutor, left as well. But that all seemed to have been sorted out. There was some inspection reports that raised a few issues. Those seem to have been sorted out, but in the last few weeks seem to have really deteriorated.
Well, it's my understanding that if you lose your good professors, you're going to lose your students.
Yeah, I think what's been happening is that Wickliffe has been getting a reputation for being very conservative, and that has had an impact on those ordinands wanting to come. So part of the crisis this spring has been ordinand numbers. When I was at Wickliffe, there were like 20, 25, 30 new ordinands a year. I understand that as of last weekend, there were only 8 people signed up for next year, and those were all 8 men. There were no women. There seemed to be no women applying to come to Wickliffe, which is a comparison to a place like Oak Hill, which is another conservative evangelical Anglican college in North London, and they have a healthy mixture of men and women there. So that there were concerns over whether they were attracting people. There were real concerns over finances. They've just gone through another round of 4 redundancies. There's real issues with the money there, because obviously if you don't have students, you don't have the money. But there was one other thing that has allegedly happened over the last few weeks that kind of brought this to a head.
Well, that's great. So you think the straw that broke the camel's back was just not being able to get students for next year?
I think there were a lot of reasons that there were concerns about what was going on. The straw that seems to have broken the camel's back, and I've heard this from quite a few different places, different people on the theological spectrum, so I'm pretty sure, and someone wants to correct me from Wickliffe Hall and say, no, this didn't happen, then that's okay. What I understand is that in the inspection reports for Wickliffe Hall from the Ministry Division of the Church of England, they were specifically asked to tighten up their appointment of new academic staff by making sure that a member of the University of Oxford theological faculty was on the interviewing committee and being part of the decision making. Also, I believe that Oxford University insisted that as part of Wickliffe Hall's ongoing sort of relationship with the university, that should also happen. So you've got the Church of England saying, have somebody from the Oxford University on the interviewing panel. You've got Oxford University saying that. And what I understand has happened is that an appointment was made of somebody to an academic position where there wasn't a proper advertising and interview process. And that was almost, as it were, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Wow.
and the council have the Wickliffe Hall council have basically moved and said enough's enough.
Yeah, well, it's strange to see a principal or dean replaced halfway through the year, and obviously there's always more than we can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think viewers of Anglican TV need to do is to pray for Richard Turnbull and for his family, for Simon Vibert, who's now acting principal, for the whole Wickliffe Hall community. Students, staff members, academic and obviously non-academic, because it's a really frightful time now. And obviously, some things can be shared, some things can't. But it's not a great position to be in. No. We're just trying to report the news here to let people know that this is sticky. But Wickliffe Hall is going through a really rough patch and needs our prayerful support.
Absolutely, because Richard was trying to do all the right things, and we need to honor him and pray for him and understand that this is a chaotic time for the whole Anglican Communion. We don't need our seminaries to be in chaos. Obviously, I guess it was 2 weeks now, George and I talked about the inability of Lambeth and Anglican communicators to write really good press releases about what's been happening. And and they made the point this week by putting out another press release on their decision to allow women bishops from the House of Bishops. I read the press release, I pulled my hair out. What's the story?
Let me explain to you what's going on.
Okay.
Back in February, General Synod basically said we want the legislation to stay as it is, and we're going to have a final vote in July.
Right.
But there's still a number of processes that need to go through, and what we've just been is through one of those processes where the House of Bishops gets a say. And the House, because it's gone through the diocese, it's gone to General Synod, now the House of Bishops get to have a say. And what the House of Bishops can do is amend the legislation in a way that they want to amend it, because they might think if we change something, it might be more amenable to traditionalists or to liberals. And to do it. And what they've done is they've amended it slightly in two ways. The first way that they've amended it is to make absolutely explicit that when a woman bishop appoints a male bishop to look after traditionalist parishes that won't accept the ministry of a woman bishop, that bishop has to be amenable to the parish. So she can't appoint any old male bishop who's like a liberal who agrees with women bishops. That bishop has to come from like a posse of traditionalist bishops, whether they're Anglo-Catholics or conservative evangelicals. So that I think that's a good thing. I don't think the liberals should have any complaint over that. That's just fair. The second thing is that they're making absolutely clear that when this bishop who's having the alternative oversight kind of thing, when he consecrates, when he ordains, when he does bishopy things, he is doing that through his own derived authority through his ordination as a bishop, and not from an authority derived from the woman bishop who he's standing in place of.
Well, that's actually a bigger issue, isn't it?
So
that's the bigger issue.
Yeah, that's a really big issue. So what they're basically saying is that a bishop ordains not through his own being a bishop, rather than his delegated bishopness from somewhere else. If that makes sense. That's a big issue. That's a really interesting issue. It's sort of there's a bit of a conversation going on this week about what does that actually mean. Conservatives are kind of, whether they're evangelicals or Anglo-Catholics, are kind of happy with that. Some of the liberals aren't, because they say, well, it takes away from a woman bishop being the ultimate boss and sacramental authority in her diocese. Where we've got to tonight, on Thursday night, is that the group of six, which is the two archbishops, and 4 members of the business committee, sort of clergy and laity, they meet to say, are these changes substantive changes, which basically mean the whole legislation has to go back through the process, or are they just little tweaks that are okay to go to synod? And they have said they just little tweaks, but they did it by a majority vote. So obviously, one or two people on there said actually that it should go back. I probably put my finger on one of the people who said no, it should go back to the diocese and so on. But that would just have been a blocking manoeuvre. So what happens now, Kevin? What happens now is that it doesn't go to General Synod. Right before General Synod meets, the convocations of the clergies of York and Canterbury meet. And they get to have a quick vote to say whether this should go back to the diocese. Now, they're very unlikely to say it should go back to the diocese, but they formally have to do that. Mm-hmm. And then when they do that, once they do that, like the night before General Synod, they'll all just turn up and go, yeah, get on with it. Then it will go to General Synod in July, and then we will have the final vote.
Well,
and who knows what will happen there?
Yeah, it is amazing because people would say that women bishops are a sure thing in England, but that's really not true yet, is it? No. So
the possibility that it will fail in the House of Laity. It needs a 2/3 vote in each of the three houses: House of Clergy, House of Laity, House of Bishops. It may go down in the House of Laity, but by a combination of people who are opposed to women bishops and people who are totally in favour but don't want anything watered down.
Right.
So they don't want alternative oversight and things like that. So looking at the numbers, I think it probably will go through, but don't count your purple chickens until they're hatched.
Okay. Again, thank you, Peter, for your report from Canterbury. Awesome. We have a report from Canterbury, and God bless. Down under via Skype, we have David Old, and you're going to talk a little bit about what's happened in Australia this last couple of weeks. A little background: Bishop McIntyre appointed a person who appointed a person who appointed a person who was kind of not altogether on the heterosexual side.
Not quite. He confirmed the license of a new priest in a parish in his diocese of Gippsland, which is in rural Victoria in southeast Australia. A man called Reverend David Head, who was in a homosexual partnership, had been for many, many years, and it was gently lauded in the diocesan newspaper, that kind of thing. Yeah. And of course, it caused a bit of an uproar.
That's what I said.
And we've reported on that. Basically, since then, the House of Bishops met together and issued a really clear protocol where they reaffirmed the orthodox understanding of human sexuality. Referred to Lambeth and referred to motions of the General Synod here in Australia, and then said that they would all basically stick together on this. They're all, maintain their collegiality, maintain the bond of peace and the unity of the House of Bishops, and do that by consensus, and maybe look again in next year about what they're going to do. Now, yeah, and we all thought, great.
But lo and behold, there's a General Synod or a Synod for the diocese, Bishop McIntyre's diocese, and he gets into the Gibson roundtable and says a whole bunch of stuff that conflict with what he said before.
It's almost as if he didn't mean what he said when he was in that meeting and agreed to the protocol. No, he gave his presidential address, as bishops will want to do and should do at their synods. And after a bit of preamble about some other stuff, he then moved to this issue. He had to talk about it. Sure. So, kudos to him for going for it. But he basically ran all the arguments we've heard before. He started off with the we don't understand things now in the way that we understood them before. We had a bit of Galileo, and the world is flat or is the world round, and who knows, but we're past that beyond. Bible writers didn't understand about people in committed same-sex relationships. Then he basically said his basic means is by your fruits will you know them. Yep. Basic means by which he assesses them. He's received grace from ministry of homosexual people, and therefore now, after considered reflection, what was really interesting is he said, I commit to appointing people no matter who they are. So it's almost like he said, what's the most contentious thing I could say? Let me say it. And he said it.
Well, and what's very interesting about this, I understand they served shellfish for lunch after his talk. It's the,
you can go there if you want to.
It's the old argument all over again. What good is the Bible because we can't read it the same way every generation?
Look, who knows? It's very surprising. He seems to have read the Bible in a completely different way than he read it less than 2 months ago. Sure. When he was at the House of Bishops meeting. Make of that what you will.
So what's Gibson going to do now?
Well, it's interesting now, isn't it? If it's what can they do? I understand a couple of things. I know a couple of things. One, I know a number of bishops are really displeased with that. Now, I think realistically, you kind of knew that at some point McIntyre was going to push forward with this.
Right.
But possibly, what I had heard was not this year, but maybe next year, he'd start to push this issue. He's always been the maverick in the House of Bishops, been well known for it. But I think the speed of which he basically reneged upon the agreement that he signed up to is quite stunning to some people. It's a major breach of collegiality as well for the House of Bishops. So, you know, to have said that he'd do what he would do and then to break it within 2 months. It reminds me, I mean, the only comparable example is Griswold. You remember this Frank Griswold?
Absolutely.
Back in 2003.
He holds the world record. I was looking here at the Guinness Book of World Records for quickest change of mind in 2 hours, 4 days, and 8 minutes. Frank Griswold.
That's right. By 2003, he goes to the primates meeting, and the primates say, if you consecrate Gene Robinson, remember, a man in a homosexual relationship, if you consecrate him as Bishop of New Hampshire, that will, the quote, tear a hole in the fabric of the communion. Right. And Griswold signs up to that declaration, gets on a plane, goes home, and is then chief consecrator in the very act which he himself admitted would tear a hole. And then he goes, what?
What do you mean?
What? What do you mean? What? And it's kind of a bit like that. It's not quite as rapid, but on this, you know, on the genteel Australian way of doing things.
Well, I think we can assume that people have been crossing their fingers in Australia and here in America for a long, long time.
Yes, but as in England, and when it was originally broached in America many years ago, there's one thing to kind of have your don't ask, don't tell policies for it to slowly carry on. It's the first almost spearhead, isn't it? It's the first beachhead publicly done of doing this. And I think the brazenness, I can't think of another word, the brazenness of agreeing to that statement and then publicly repudiating it, and doing so in the name of integrity and good conscience. It's got a number of people riled up. What's going to happen? Well, I think you should expect to see a number of synods of around Australia maybe do something in response, maybe even sooner. Maybe some standing committees may want to do something. I think you may even end up with some bishops publicly doing something. They're going to have to consider what they're going to do. I do know, having spoken previously to some conservative bishops in Australia, that while they were prepared to accept the women bishops issue, the homosexual issue is one on which they really want to draw the line, simply because the scriptures are clear about the sinfulness of that act and how it's a completely different category. Even if you disagree on women's ordination, you have to admit it's a completely different category.
Absolutely.
And so they're absolutely determined that this is the... Well, I know from previously they've said this is the area on this is the line on which they're going to stand. So, you know, it'll be slowly. Don't expect anything in a hurry. Mind you, we said that about John.
Yeah,
but I would be very surprised if you don't see something by the end of the year.
Well, here's the amazing thing. Here in America, it's no longer fun to do that anymore. We had the opportunity, not but a week ago, to elect another homosexual bishop in New Hampshire, of all places. Yeah, and it's so, you know, it's so past. It's not fun anymore. There's no TV press here. There's no 60 Minutes. You know. Oh well. That's right. So, all right. Well, thank you for your report from Down Under, and I'm sure we'll catch you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Bye-bye. Via the magic of the little Skype button, I have on the other line Alan Haley. You are actually recording from San Francisco today. You making a little trip?
Yes, that's right. I had a little legal business to do down here.
Well, there's probably a lot to do in San Francisco, but let's talk a little bit about what's happening nationally. Here, obviously, we have what's called Obamacare, and that's been struggling its way into the Supreme Court this year. What's amazing now is churches are starting to look closer at the law because it's affecting them, and there's kind of a church on Sunday clause. And we're discovering more and more as we read this law that it's affecting the whole Church of America as to what's protected, what's not protected, and what they have to impose upon their healthcare system. So much so that there's 18 different lawsuits from the Roman Catholic Church.
12 different
12,
lawsuits.
yeah, 12 different lawsuits this week were filed in federal
43, involving 43 different Catholic institutions.
yeah, in federal courts around the nation this week. This is big.
Yes. And what's going on, I mean, first of all, Obamacare itself is not so much the problem, because if you remember, in order to get Obamacare passed, they had to put a provision in saying that it would not mandate abortion funding. And they had to finesse that, and Obama issued an executive order promising no agency would do that. But then the Health and Human Services, under power delegated to it by the Act, decided that the mandated healthcare policy that the federal government would require every employer to provide at a minimum would include services for contraception, abortifacients, and things like that, at no cost to the person employed.
Now, what's important, what I find important about this law is that they made an exception for church on Sunday.
And then they promptly issued an exception, right, for what they call house of worship. A house of worship, in other words, an institution that's primarily serving its own people. And in doing so, they drew an interesting, we talk of the freedom of exercise of religion, which the Catholic Church interprets broadly to mean like operate schools and hospitals and soup kitchens all across the country. That's all part of exercising their religion. But for Obama, it simply means the freedom of worship to go into a church on Sunday. And or for Obama's Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius. So this mandate, they recognize it emburdening religion, but they exempted only actual churches as such from the thing. And in giving recognition to the fact that there was a burden on the conscience here of the churches, they've acknowledged that this proposed regulation imposes a burden on the freedom of exercise of religion. So they kind of contradict themselves.
Well, that leads to the question, who gets to decide what religion is?
Exactly. This is, the Supreme Court recently handed down a unanimous decision in the, was it Hosanna Tabor Lutheran school case, where the EEOC tried to claim they were discriminating in insisting on hiring a Baptist employee. And the Supreme Court said that's their right. They're as a institution, and so it's obviously religion is broader than just the churches on Sunday. It extends into all walks of life, the way a given church decides to practice its religion. And just like the analogy here would be like Congress's power to make war. There's no question that Congress has the power to declare war and institute a draft, but we've always allowed a conscientious objector who not have to serve in the war. And so we've given always recognized that, because we don't want to burden somebody's exercise of their religious conscience, and if they don't believe in, if they're pacifist and don't believe in the principles of war. So I don't see where the government gets off here saying, well, yeah, we have the power to impose everybody, require them to buy insurance. And then we can spell out that insurance, even for religious people, has to provide abortion services, contraception services, and so on. And I just don't see this argument's going to make it. But of course, if the Obamacare itself is struck down by the Supreme Court by the end of June, which is probably when we'll have a decision, then of course this issue goes away, because Obamacare continue, that this becomes an issue for these courts to decide.
So would you say that there's a lot of merit to the Roman Catholic lawsuit?
Definitely, and it's amazing how little coverage has been given to the filing of these suits in the media. I mean, this is a major legal initiative on the part of the Catholic churches, and they're joined by a bunch of other churches, of course not by the Episcopal Church, but anyway, they're joined by a bunch of other churches, and all the news media are just ignoring it.
Sure. Well, I think this is so beyond the scope of the news media. They don't even know how to define religion other than candles in a church service, and that's kind of what Obama thinks. So they're all on the same page, and you're only going to find stories like this on Anglican TV and other blogs around the world. But it's interesting to find that, some 200 years into the use of our Constitution, we still don't have a real good example of religion is just not something on Sundays. It's expressed all 7 days, and we should have those freedoms of the freedom of religion expressed in those 7 days.
Exactly. And so if it's not going to be these cases, there'll have to be some other, because this administration seems is the most anti-religious one ever to hold office, in terms of it's determined to go around and impose its mandates on people. So if it tries this in some other area, arena, again, remember, don't forget the Hosanna Tabor case.
That's right.
Was again the Obama administration, the EEOC, declaring that there wasn't an exemption for ministers in the church. Trying to narrow that exemption and all that. So it's they've just pretty much declared war on the free exercise of religion.
Well, let's hope you and I don't get audited for defending our faith. But thank you so much, Alan, and have fun in San Francisco this week, although you're working. But I'll catch you next week.
Okay.
All right. God bless. You've reached the end of episode 41. Congratulations. George and I have a couple quick announcements before we go. First, in June, we're going to both travel to the Provincial Assembly, which is going to be in Ridgecrest, North Carolina. We're going to hold a special meetup gathering, fans, probably Friday night. We'll give you more information as we get close to that. But it's a great opportunity for us to mix and match and have fun with the fans of Anglican Unscripted.
Also help us develop strategies for developing the show. What should we do differently? What should we do in addition? All the fun things that make this show just a joy for Kevin and I to do.
Well, and for you to listen to. It helps improve the show. I just traveled back from Long Beach, California, and I met a lot of people that asked, "Oh, we never knew about this George character till recently." Well, he's a character. I'm a character. We're fun to talk to, and we'll have time for that at the June Assembly. You're also going to be going to General Convention. People don't know this. You don't really work right now for a periodical as a full-time job. You do obviously work for Anglican Unscripted and Anglican Inc., and you do other jobs for Church of England News, but you don't have a sponsor to send you to General Convention this year. So we need to help raise money to get the reporter of reporters, George Conger, to General Convention. How much do we need to raise, George?
It's roughly $1,500. It's a week long, and it's a downtown. It's expensive to go to General Convention. It's expensive to cover it. But there's going to be a lot going on this year. We're going to discuss the question of gay marriage, the Anglican covenant, and the future structure of the Episcopal Church. Is it going to hold together?
Well, here, I'll save the trip. No, it's not going to hold together. The covenant's out, and homosexual marriage is in. How's that?
Well, if I can avoid going to Indianapolis for a week, that's great. But I still think there'll be something else worth reporting.
I'm sure there is. So here's the link, Anglican.tv/donate. There'll be a special link. Send George to General Convention. That will
and to bring me home again, too.
I suppose. Send George a round trip to General Convention. And please click that link and donate graciously, because, and I'll take the link down when we reach $1,500. And that way you'll know you can stop donating. And that will ensure that you get the best news possible for General Convention. And obviously it's something we look forward to. I'll be going to Forward in Faith in St. Louis and some other things this summer. So it's going to be a busy summer for both of us. And in conclusion, I want to thank Peter, David, and Alan, and my co-host George, for another wonderful Anglican Unscripted. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I also want to thank two people who have made this show possible today.
Yes.
My wife Susan and your wife Jill.
Absolutely. We couldn't do it without
them. Because they put up with us in a way many wives would not appreciate. And they've really supported us and affirmed us in our work. And I want to thank them both.
Absolutely. And it's not even Mother's Day. Cool. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And you've been watching episode 41 of Anglican Unscripted.
Okay. All right. Get your microphone on.
That stuff about feeding the dog made me hungry.
Yeah, fairly. So the house is going to get really quiet because my wife and oldest daughter are going shopping. So that's about 90% of the possible noise here. Oh, she's still in the house. Okay, well, we'll talk about her. And talking about primates. Oh, hi, George. Uh-huh. All right. You let me know when you're ready. Okay. 3, 2, 1.